The vote wasn't close. Of the 47 sovereign species represented in the Grand Conclave of the Galactic Covenant, 43 raised their bioluminescent appendages, their crystalline voting rod, their pressure-sensitive membrane, and their neural transmission flags in unanimous agreement. The resolution was clean, efficient, and by every legal and moral framework the Covenant had constructed over its 11,000-year history, entirely justified. Resolution 7741 Omega. The Terran experiment was to be terminated. Earth was to be sterilized. The chamber of the Grand Conclave was a marvel of interstellar architecture, a hollow sphere suspended in the gravitational equilibrium point between 7 different star systems, maintained by the combined engineering of a dozen ancient civilizations. Its walls were composed of a living crystal that automatically adjusted its atmospheric composition, gravity, temperature, and lighting to accommodate the biological needs of every species present. Soft amber light bathed the tiered seating that spiraled upward from the central dais in a vast, perfect helix. The air smelled faintly of whatever each individual species found most calming, a different comfort for every node, every chemoreceptor, every atmospheric sensory apparatus in the room. It was designed to make everyone feel at home. Ambassador Elena Vasquez did not feel at home. She sat at the small, circular Terran delegation desk at the very base of the central dais, the lowest point in the room, the position assigned to the newest and least prestigious member of the Covenant. The desk was a deliberate architectural insult, small enough that Elena's knees nearly pressed against the edge, clearly designed for a species with a significantly smaller body plan. She had requested a different table twice. Both requests had been logged, processed, and diplomatically ignored. Elena was 44 years old. With close-cropped silver hair, she had earned a decade ahead of schedule in the diplomatic trenches of the Kepler Accord. She had a broad, angular face, weathered by years of negotiating under artificial lighting in recycled atmospheric pressure. She wore the standard-issue deep navy uniform of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps, its fabric threaded with passive biometric sensors that her support team monitored from the mission carrier, sitting 3 kilometers off the Conclave's docking port. She was not, by any objective galactic standard, an impressive creature. Supreme Arbiter Vael-Corum of the Tharian hegemony certainly didn't think so. Vael-Corum was the presiding officer of the Conclave session, an ancient being of the avian-descended Tharian species, standing nearly 3 meters tall on 4 articulated legs, with a crown of iridescent sensory plumes fanned wide in the formal posture of absolute judicial authority. The Tharians had been civilized for longer than humanity had possessed fire. Their philosophical texts predated human language. Their legal code was the foundation upon which the entire Covenant had been built. Vael-Corum looked down at Elena the way a cathedral looks down at a pebble. The resolution before the conclave, Vael-Corum announced, their translated voice resonating through the chamber with the deep, modulated authority of a species that had been giving important speeches for 11,000 years, concerns the continued membership and biological status of the Terran species, colloquially designated humanity, within the Galactic Covenant. The evidence submitted by the Covenant Intelligence Committee is, as the chamber has reviewed, both comprehensive and deeply troubling. On the massive holographic display suspended above the central dais, the evidence unfolded. Elena had seen it before. She had read every word of the Intelligence Committee's report, had memorized every data point, had spent 3 weeks in exhausting consultation calls with the Security Council back on Earth reviewing the finding. She watched it now with the same expression she always wore in these chambers, a carefully constructed mask of professional attention that revealed absolutely nothing of the volcano burning underneath. The display showed Earth, beautiful blue, fragile Earth, and then it showed what humanity had done to it, and to itself, and to the 12 colony worlds it had seeded in the past 2 centuries. It showed weapons. It showed war. It showed the devastating efficiency of human industrial production applied to the systematic destruction of other human beings. It showed casualty figures from conflicts that the rest of the Covenant had watched with mounting horror from across the light years. The Tharian Intelligence Committee had been thorough. Elena had to give them that. In 230 standard years of Covenant observation, Vael-Corum continued, their plumes shifting through shades of deep violet, the Tharian color of grave concern, the Terran species has engaged in 417 distinct organized conflicts, 11 of which qualify as planetary-scale warfare events by Covenant classification standards. They have developed and deployed weapons of mass destruction on 17 separate occasions. They have demonstrated a consistent, biologically embedded pattern of interspecies aggression that their own psychological literature acknowledges, but has proven entirely unable to resolve. A soft, collective murmur moved through the chamber. Elena recognized the sounds of 47 different species expressing the same emotion in 47 different ways: discomfort, disgust, fear. Furthermore, Vael-Corum continued, humanity's recent expansion into the Kepler and Proxima systems has introduced these behavioral patterns to previously stable interstellar regions. The Covenant's models project a 94.7% probability that, within 3 standard centuries, unrestricted Terran expansion will result in an interstellar conflict event that will directly threaten the sovereignty and biological integrity of no fewer than 12 current Covenant member species. The display shifted to show probability cascade, elegant mathematical arguments for the deaths of billions of human beings. The Covenant did not invite humanity to the stars, High Counselor Drex of the Velfari Consortium said from their elevated seat. The Velfari were a cephalopod-descended species, their bodies a shifting aurora of chromatophores that communicated emotional states in real time. Currently, they were pulsing deep red, the color of unambiguous anger. We discovered them already there, expanding, breeding, consuming resources. And now, having observed them for 2 centuries, the evidence is clear. They are not compatible with civilization. They are a disease, Ambassador Vasquez, and I say that with no malice but with scientific precision. A disease that the Covenant has a responsibility to cure before it spreads. More murmurs, more colored lights in the dimness of the chamber, more voting rods clicking against crystalline surfaces. Elena sat perfectly still. It was at this point in the proceedings that every other species in the room expected her to do what prey species did when cornered. They expected tears, or appeals to mercy, or desperate promises of reform that both parties knew were biologically impossible to keep. They had seen it before, with the Keth of the Outer Spiral, with the Marin Collective, with 7 other species whose galactic histories had ended quietly and efficiently in chambers very much like this one. The Covenant was not cruel. It was simply thorough. It had faced the question of dangerous emerging civilizations before, and it had developed a clean, compassionate answer. Elena let them wait. She picked up the small ceramic cup of water her aide had placed on the desk before the session began, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it back down on its saucer with a precise, quiet click. Then she stood up. She was not a tall woman. Standing, she barely reached the lower edge of Vael-Corum's primary field of vision. The Terran delegation desk, being the lowest point in the room, placed her at the bottom of a 47-tier amphitheater of alien dignitaries, all of whom were looking down at her with the settled confidence of beings who had already decided how this meeting would end. She adjusted the small translation bead, clipped behind her right ear, and cleared her throat. "Supreme Arbiter Vael-Corum," Elena said. Her voice was calm, not strained, not trembling. Calm in the specific way that a deep river is calm still on the surface, moving very fast underneath. High Counselors, ambassadors, honored representatives of the Galactic Covenant, I have listened to the committee's report with great attention. I have reviewed the evidence. I understand the logic of the resolution before you. She paused. And I want you to know, Elena continued, her eyes moving slowly around the chamber with the patient, deliberate sweep of someone who is making absolutely certain they are seen, that I am not going to argue with your data. A different kind of murmur moved through the room, surprise this time. The Covenant's Intelligence Committee is correct, Elena said. Humanity is violent. We have fought wars of extraordinary brutality. We have developed weapons that, by the standards of this body, are monstrous. We have, at various points in our history, done things to each other and to the environments around us that I cannot defend and will not attempt to defend. She let that sit in the air of the chamber for a moment. Everything in that report is true. Vael-Corum's sensory plumes had shifted to a curious pale gold, the Thyrian expression of being genuinely uncertain how to proceed. In 11,000 years of presiding over these sessions, They had never encountered a representative of a condemned species who simply agreed with the charges. However, Elena said, and the word land. In the silence of the chamber with the weight of a dropped stone, the committee's report, for all its thoroughness, contains a significant analytical gap. It documents what humanity has done. It does not adequately address what humanity is. She reached down to the small briefcase beside her chair, opened it, and withdrew a single data drive, which she set on the desk in front of her. "I have prepared a counter-submission," Elena said. "I would like to request 15 minutes of conclave time to present it." Vael-Corum exchanged a series of rapid blink patterns with their two senior judicial aides, a Thyrian form of rapid private communication that the translation matrix was not designed to intercept. After a moment, they turned back to the chamber. "The Terran ambassador is granted 15 minutes, Vael-Corum announced, with the carefully neutral tone of someone who was certain it would not change anything. Elena picked up the data drive and walked to the central dais. The holographic display shifted, replacing the committee's probability cascades and casualty figures with a single image. It was a photograph, taken from low orbit above the North Atlantic. A small wooden ship, barely visible against the vast gray of the ocean, alone in the middle of a storm that should have swallowed it whole. "This vessel," Elena said, "is the Mayflower. It crossed the Atlantic Ocean on Earth in the year 1620 of our common era. The Atlantic Ocean, for reference, is a body of water approximately 9,600 kilometers wide. The Mayflower was 27 meters long. It had no engine, no satellite navigation, no weather prediction system, and no means of communication with land. The crew crossed it in 66 days. 12 people died. The rest survived." She advanced the display, a sequence of images spanning centuries. 1903. A bicycle mechanic from Dayton, Ohio, built a machine capable of powered, controlled atmospheric flight and flew it for 12 seconds. 66 years later, his species landed on their moon. Another image. 1928. A Scottish physician noticed that a common mold was killing bacteria in a petri dish. Within 20 years, that observation had saved more than 200 million lives from preventable infection. Another. 1945. Humanity developed and used nuclear weapons, killing over 200,000 people in 2 days. Within 50 years, they had negotiated international treaties that prevented any further use of those weapons in warfare. Not because they lost the ability to use them, because they chose not to. The chamber was very quiet. "The committee's report is correct that humanity is violent," Elena said. "What the report does not adequately quantify is that humanity is also the only species in the documented galactic record to have repeatedly invented ways to destroy itself completely. And then, through a combination of stubbornness, creativity, and what I can only describe as an almost irrational refusal to accept defeat, chosen not to." She paused. "We are not peaceful. But we are, against all probability, still here. And there is a meaningful difference between those two things." She advanced the display again. This time it showed not Earth but stars. "In the 2 centuries since humanity made first contact with the Covenant, we have established 12 colony worlds, yes. We have had conflicts in several of them, yes. The committee is correct about both of these things." Elena's voice remained level, but something beneath it had changed. A shift in register so subtle that most of the species in the chamber couldn't have identified it. "What the committee's report does not include is this." The display filled with data. Medical records, agricultural yield statistics, terraforming surveys, technological exchange logs. "Colony World Kepler 452d, Elena said. "When we arrived, the native atmospheric composition was 340 parts per million methane, rendering the world uninhabitable for the Velfari who had claimed it as a future settlement zone for 3 centuries without the resources to terraform it. Human engineering teams spent 11 years rendering it breathable. We then handed it to the Vael-Corum Consortium free of charge and moved our colony to an adjacent uninhabited rock. She looked up at High Counselor Drex, whose chromatophores had gone a startled, uncertain amber. You called us a disease, High Counselor. That colony you're living in on 452D was a gift from the disease. The amber deepened. Colony World Proxima Centauri B, Elena continued. During our initial settlement, our geological surveys identified a subterranean fungal network covering 40% of the planet's surface that demonstrated characteristics consistent with primitive distributed intelligence. We immediately suspended all further colonization, submitted our findings to the Covenant Science Authority, and spent 4 years cooperating with the resulting investigation. She paused. The Myriad Consensus, which now holds protected stat. Us as a recognized Covenant life form, was discovered because humanity stopped digging when we found something interesting in the dirt. She looked around the chamber. I'm not presenting this evidence to argue that humanity is good, Elena said. We are not good, we are complicated. We contain within a single species the capacity for extraordinary violence and extraordinary compassion, often in the same individual, often in the same afternoon. The committee's report accurately documents the violence. It has consistently failed to document the compassion, and I believe that failure is not an oversight. I believe it is because compassion is harder to quantify than casualty figures, and the Covenant's models are very good at counting bodies, but not particularly good at counting choices. She set the data drive on the surface of the central dais and stepped back. I want to address the resolution itself, Elena said. Resolution 7740-1 Omega proposes the biological termination of the Terran species on the grounds that we represent an unacceptable risk to Covenant stability. She folded her hands behind her back. I want to be precise about what that means. The Covenant is proposing to kill approximately 14 billion human beings, including the children on our colony worlds who were born into the Covenant's jurisdiction and have never held a weapon in their lives, on the basis of a probability model. The chamber was absolutely silent. A model, Elena continued, her voice still perfectly level, that assigns a 94.7% probability to a future conflict, not a certainty, a probability, which means there is a 5.3% chance that the model is wrong. There is a 5.3% chance that humanity, given the time and the opportunity, finds the same path that every other species in this chamber eventually found, the path away from the violence. She looked up at Vael-Corum. The Therian hegemony did not always have a legal code, supreme arbiter. Your own historical archives document a period of territorial warfare among the early Therian city-states that lasted 400 years, and resulted in the deaths of approximately 60% of your species. Someone decided to give the Therians time to figure it out. I am asking the Covenant to extend humanity the same consideration. Vael-Corum's plumes shifted through several colors in rapid succession, a display of internal deliberation so complex that Elena's translation matrix simply flagged it as untranslatable emotional processing. Ambassador Vasquez, Vael-Corum said at last, their voice carefully measured. The situations are not analogous. The early Therian conflicts were contained to a single world. Humanity has already expanded to 12 systems. The potential for escalation is categorically different. You're right, Elena said. It is different. Humanity has already proven we can survive interstellar distances, establish stable colony populations, and develop the technology required for sustained interstellar travel. In other words, we have already demonstrated that we are not a threat that can be contained by geography. She tilted her head slightly. Which means, Supreme Arbiter, that the question the Covenant should actually be asking is not whether to destroy us. The question is whether destroying us is possible. The silence that followed this statement was of a different quality than the ones before it. I want to be very clear, Elena said, and now there was something in her voice that the translation matrices across the chamber were working very hard to classify, something that sat at the precise intersection of absolute honesty and complete absence of threat, that I'm not making a military threat. I'm not standing here telling this chamber that Earth will go to war with the Covenant if you vote to enforce this resolution. That would be an absurd thing to say. Earth has 17 warships. The Covenant has 47 fleets. In a direct engagement, we lose, completely. There is no version of that story where we win. She paused. But I am asking you to consider something that your probability models may not have fully accounted for, Elena continued. In our history, when humanity has been told that something is impossible, or that we are too weak, or that we are too small, or that the forces arrayed against us are too overwhelming to resist, we have a very consistent response. Her eyes moved slowly around the chamber one more time, meeting the visual organs, the sensory arrays, the bioluminescent communication patches of 47 species looking down at her from their comfortable seats. We get creative. She let that sit. 14 billion people told they are going to die, Elena said quietly, have a remarkable capacity for creativity. The same species that crossed an ocean in a wooden box, that flew into space on a controlled explosion, that figured out that a bread mold could save lives, that looked at the vacuum of space and decided to live there, that species, told it has nothing left to lose, pointed at a technologically superior enemy and given no other option. She almost smiled. Supreme Arbiter, I genuinely do not know what we would do. I don't think you do either. And I would respectfully suggest that not knowing is itself a significant data point that your committee's 94.7% probability did not account for. The chamber was not quiet now. It was something beyond quiet, a suspended state in which 47 species were very carefully reconsidering the calculations they had arrived with. Elena reached into the breast pocket of her uniform and withdrew a small, flat object. She held it up so the chamber could see it. It was a coin, old, worn, minted in a country that no longer existed, rescued from a pre-contact Earth museum collection and carried by every United Earth ambassador as part of their formal commission. On one side was a face. On the other side, rendered in faded relief, were the words that had been stamped onto that particular coin for nearly 300 years before first contact. E pluribus unum, Elena said. It's Latin and ancient Earth language. It means out of many one. She set the coin on the surface of the central dais beside the data drive. We have never been one thing in all of our history, not one culture, not one government, not one set of values. We have always been many, violent and compassionate, destructive and creative, terrifying and occasionally astonishing. She stepped back. We are not asking the Covenant to love us. We're not even asking you to trust us. We are asking you for time. We are asking you to vote against this resolution on the grounds that the outcome you fear has not yet happened, and there is still a 5.3% chance that it never will. And in a universe as large as this one, with as many mysteries still unsolved, as many worlds still undiscovered, as many problems still unfixed, she paused one final time. 5.3% is not nothing. She walked back to her desk and sat down. The chamber remained in that suspended state for a long moment. Then Vael-Corum called for a recess, the first unscheduled recess in a conclave session in over 200 years. The vote, when it came 3 hours later, was not 43-4. It was 29-18. Resolution 7741, Omega failed. It was not a victory, exactly. 29 species had still voted to end humanity's existence, and Elena knew, as she gathered her materials from the small, insulting desk at the bottom of the chamber, that 29 species would remember that vote for a very long time. The relationship between humanity and the Galactic Covenant was not going to be a comfortable one. The path ahead was long and uncertain, and filled with the specific kind of danger that comes from being tolerated by beings who are not entirely sure they were right to tolerate you. But Elena Vasquez, As she walked out of the grand conclave of the Galactic Covenant with the specific posture of someone who had just survived something that most reasonable observers would have said was unsurvivable, was not thinking about the 29 species who had voted against humanity. She was thinking about the 18 who hadn't. Outside the chamber, in the long crystalline corridor that led back to the docking port, her aide Marcus fell into step beside her. He was a young man, just 2 years out of the diplomatic academy, and he had spent the entire session monitoring her biometrics from the mission carrier, and quietly having what the academy would later describe as a significant psychological growth experience. "Ambassador," he said carefully, "when you said you weren't making a military threat." "I wasn't," Elena confirmed. "But when you said you didn't know what 14 billion people told they had nothing to lose would do." "I don't," Elena said. "Neither does anyone else. That was rather the point." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Is that what diplomacy is? Reminding people of what they don't know?" Elena thought about it. She thought about the coin she had left on the dais, which she was fairly certain Vael-Corum would have returned to her through official channels within the week. She thought about the 18 species who had voted to let humanity continue existing, and whether any of them had voted that way because of the speech or because of the coin, or simply because the math of a 5.3% chance had looked different to them than it had to their colleague. She thought about the Mayflower. She thought about the Atlantic Ocean. She thought about a bicycle mechanic from Dayton who had looked at the sky and decided that not knowing how to fly was not the same as being unable to learn. "Mostly," she said, "diplomacy is reminding people that the future hasn't happened yet." She pushed open the door to the docking corridor, and behind her, in the vast and ancient chamber of the Galactic Covenant, 47 species began the long, complicated, and entirely necessary work of figuring out what to do with the strangest and most unsettling addition to their community in 11,000 years of recorded history. The humans, as it turned out, were not going anywhere, and the Covenant, slowly and with great reluctance, was beginning to understand that this was not entirely a bad thing. Somewhere in the back of the data banks of the Covenant Intelligence Committee, a probability model quietly updated its figure. The chance of Terran-related interstellar conflict within 3 centuries held at 94.7%, but a new variable had been added to the calculation, one that the committee's original analysts had not known how to quantify and had therefore left out entirely. The variable was labeled, in the dry language of galactic statistical analysis, as follows: observed Terran response to existential pressure. Its assigned probability weight was small. The committee's models, being very good at counting bodies and not particularly good at counting choices, had assigned it a value of only 5.3%. The committee did not know, and would not know for some time, that in the entire 11,000-year history of the Galactic Covenant, no species had ever made a number that small feel quite so large.